let's move now to our panel. And the purpose of this panel is to look at how can we use data to shape the health system. And what I might do is introduce each person as we get to them, because you know how it's hard to remember things if I introduce them all at once. But what we're going to ask them to do is to share examples where data has been used to shape the health system, and then what lessons we can learn from that about how to use data to improve the system as we go along. And I might start with Karen. Professor Karen Canfel is Director of Cancer Research at Cancer New South Wales, as I said. She's an adjunct professor at Sydney Medical School, and she has a PhD equivalent in epidemiology at Oxford, which she always tells me not to say, but I think that's a big deal and she deserves recognition. And she's the National Health and Medical Research Council lead for the Centre of Research Excellence, and has been very involved in cervical cancer, bowel, breast, lung and PSA screening. So would you please give her a warm round of applause? So Karen, I want an example where you can tell us how data shapes the system, but first of all, what is data? What does that word mean to you?
Oh gosh, what does it mean to me? I think as an epidemiologist, data is almost a living thing. It's something that we work with every day. And you know, I guess there are formal definitions. It's about information on when people contact, in our context, the health system. And so what we do in our team and other similar groups is really work very carefully with linked data collections, and these are critical to the furthering of research. Mm-hmm.
And what is linked data collections? What does that mean?
So we normally use that when we're talking about bringing together routinely collected data. So by that I mean data that's collected in the course of delivery of health services, for example. And then we're bringing that together in a secure way that de-identifies individuals so that we can get large-scale data sets to work with. And this is absolutely invaluable for research. I think we've heard Craig talk to the importance of these collections in cancer care. But, you know, I want to second what was said before. I think perhaps what is less well appreciated is the importance of these collections in informing research into population health and furthering the decisions we make in cancer prevention and cancer screening as well.
You've done a lot in relation to vaccine evaluation, so can you explain the use of data to shape our approach to the use of vaccines, please?
Well, I mean, I've been closest to the evaluation of the HPV vaccine, and I'm sure many of you know, because of the leadership of Ian Fraser and his group, it's, you know, Australia led the world in the, if you like, the deployment of the vaccine, and we also had, you know, the largest uptake, and we had a catch-up that went to age 26, where we had this very early international experience.
And could you just so everyone's on the same page, what is the human papillomavirus and what cancers does it cause, and what was the vaccine that Ian Fraser and his colleague invented?
Yeah, so human papillomavirus, HPV, is really, it's a widespread virus in human society. There's many different types of it, and critical for cancer prevention. It's now well known that it causes almost all cervical cancers, virtually all, but it also causes a number of other cancers in the anogenital area for both men and women, and also, of course, head and neck cancer for both men and women. So it's really, you know, it's been key to the success of primary and secondary prevention via HPV vaccine and cervical screening that we've understood this relationship.
And were we the first country in the world to give both boys and girls at the age of 12 or 13 the vaccine? I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, so Australia has led the world first in the first national female vaccination program. We're one of the first countries then to introduce male vaccination, universal male vaccination. And as I mentioned, we've had very high uptake relatively at the international level, and we had uptake in women to age 26. So this vaccine evaluation piece that I'm talking about actually was critical not only to understanding the impact on women here in New South Wales and in Australia, but also actually it's been very critical internationally in the ongoing evaluation of the effectiveness and safety of HPV vaccination.
So what are the... I get a sense of what you've said, that big data sets are best. What are some of the challenges we face in collecting data, and what can people like us in this room do to ensure we're getting the big data sets that we need for people like you to do the work that you do?
Well, that's a great question, and there's a complex set of issues, and I'll speak to it as a researcher. I think for all of us in this room, one thing we can do, is I guess inform ourselves of the benefits of these big data collections, and participate in them when we can. So, one amazing example, I think, is the 45 and up study, which I know there'll be many people here that are participants in this room.
So just explain it.
It's quite visionary. It was established, I think, over 15 years ago now. It's what's called a large-scale cohort. It involves over 260,000 people in New South Wales who signed up at the age of 45 and up, as the name implies, 10 or so years ago. And it's just because those people agreed to let researchers, in a careful and responsible way, let them link their data on their health behaviours and questionnaire completion to routinely collected data, to their MBS, to their PBS data. It's been an absolutely incredible resource for research.
And it's an ongoing resource, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think for cancer research, it's actually only just maturing now, and that's something that our teams and other teams at Auspice by the SACS are really working hard to do, because we can now study risk factors. We can look at people's risk factors at baseline and look at their actual outcomes for cancer development over time, and that's been very, very important in our population.
Could I ask a question? It's based a little bit on personal experience, but I'm actually in the 45 up sample. I don't know how, but I was got and I agreed. And then, if I could just say, they're very good at communicating with the patient or consumer and giving us updates and inviting us to briefing sessions. It's incredibly respectful. I had that spooky thing of when I got a new form to catch up with how I was going. I had an awful lot to fill in because of having got head and neck cancer, which was kind of hard. But my question is this: when I first got cancer, your organisation, Cancer Council, asked me to donate my tumour to research. And in the midst of a very difficult period, I didn't. And I now live with regret. I feel like I could have contributed. And I just was a bit overwhelmed at the time, and the idea of giving a piece of myself away just felt a little bit odd. But I guess my question is this: do we, in order to shape the cancer system, do we need to do a bit more patient and family education, if not general population education, about why giving information or even bits of yourself, tumours, into people like you is really important? I mean, do we do enough of that?
I don't think we do. I think, but it is very hard. I mean, we're obviously talking about sort of a technically complex process, but I think we do need to get better at that engagement, and I think we do need to get better at telling some of the success stories about how this type of data has enabled change and improvements in health.
So how have you improved cervical screening using data?
Well, the type of process I talked about before of documenting the impact of the vaccine was really critical to this, because Australia was, among the other firsts I mentioned, was the first to experience cervical screening in a vaccinated population. And so this is now a real-world experience that had to be documented through looking at data that came from cancer registries, that came from screening registries, and came from the National HPV Vaccination Registry. And that information was critical, not only in forming the current outcomes for women, but actually in enabling us and others, and our research team was closely involved in using this to predict, well, what would be the best interventions given this scenario, and in fact allowing us to do some detailed modelling of changes to cervical screening, which have now been introduced, that really better tailor the screening that we do and that we offer women to the impact of the vaccine, and that's by actually testing for the HPV virus itself.
And it does mean we have the speculum in us less often, doesn't it?
It does. Unfortunately, it means the speculum exam is still in play, but the key thing is we've moved from a pap smear-based program, which was successful, but to get the maximum benefit, women had to have 26 tests in their lifetime. Now we've got an HPV-based program. It's only 9 to 10 tests in a lifetime. So that's, and also we can show better outcomes for women. So it's a bit of a win-win.
I'm looking at a group of young women here because I reckon they should be clapping here. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting down and nitty-gritty, but in a way that's what the public would understand. Give us information and you might have to have less pap smears. I'd give them anything. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments so far? Because they're all brainiacs and they've all got a lot to say. But I guess any question or comment, please don't hesitate. All questions are welcome. Thank you for helping me. Yes, this is coming via the app. This is my app girl, Sarah.
In Canada, does the drug need to be registered by the regulatory authority before it is funded?
In Canada, does a drug need to be registered before it's funded?
Yes.
Do you want another one?
How do you balance the need to use more timely... Oh, sorry, phone.
We've lost screen. Just one moment, please. This is the modern world.
How do you balance the need to use more timely data of poorer quality with the risk of potentially making incorrect conclusions?
That's also an interesting question. So, well, we hope that the data will improve. I guess, in a way, my answer is, again, a call for more access to data, because while one of the issues is that there may be incorrect conclusions drawn, if there are more people able to look at the data, if researchers are able to request access to the linked data and analyze some of the same issues, if there has been some sort of a incorrect inference drawn, you're more likely to uncover that. The more people, the creativity and the rigor of more and more people having access and being able to look at data can help mitigate some of that.
And guys, when I go to questions, please don't worry if you're on the other side of the room. I love running to you. I'm trying to lose weight. Can I come now to Professor David Roeder? Could you wave so they know who you are? And he's the Chair of Cancer Epidemiology and Population Health at the University of South Australia, where he works in collaboration with Cancer Council South Australia. He also works with Cancer Australia and, of course, the Cancer Institute New South Wales. And he has a major focus in his life on data linkage. Just before I come to your examples of the use of data to shape a system, we've heard about cancer registries there from Karen. What are they and why are they critical in shaping the future? Really close to your mouth.
Yeah, well, cancer registries collect data on all cancers that occur in a population. That's a population-based cancer registry. That information is key to being able to understand the burden of cancer on a population and how it's distributed and how it's changing and where the hotspots are and where they're getting hotter and where we're making headway. So they really give us the eyes we need to look at population health in the cancer world.
Can you give us an example where data from a registry or another source has been used to shape the system, the cancer system?
I can give you an example where it has, and also maybe an example where it hasn't in the screening world. BreastScreen was based on trials that were done many years ago, using data, of course. And those trials were done in different countries. And the question always arises, how will it go in the Australian setting, in a non-research environment? So research was done using data collected, data linkage at cancer registries to look at performance of that system to see if it was living up to expectations drawn from trials in other countries. So that was crucial, and we looked as best we could at impact on mortality, for example, to see if we were getting what we expected we would be getting. So that was, I think, a very heavily data-laden service that measured almost everything. In the
could I just ask you, before we leave the breast,
yes, yeah.
How did that shape what happens to us as women in Australia in relation to getting checked for cancer? So how did it translate to the individuals?
I'll give a practical example, because it sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, I acknowledge that, but women, when they go to get screened, would like to think the cancer, if they have a cancer, that the screening finds it, that it doesn't miss something that is findable. So it's a cancer registry linked to the screening data allows you to see if the numbers of cancers that aren't being found in women being regularly screened is an acceptably small number, given the technology we're dealing with. and if it is elevated, we jump in and do something about it. The mammograms are retrieved, people examine the mammograms.
Yes, it's working, but nice and close to your mouth, everybody.
It's almost in my mouth. I'm tasting it at the moment.
Well, they used to tell me at the ABC, make love to the microphone.
Now I've lost the track of my thought. So if we find that cancers are being missed, obviously there needs to upgrade the screening reading. So that's a practical example.
I get a sense that the registries, as an example of a large data set, enable you to monitor and adapt systems in real time.
Yes, they allow us. Karen talked a lot about the initial research, which is fundamental, and we need to know that the evidence that coming out of that research is being delivered across the population with equity, and that it's delivering what we'd expect. And a registry is a fundamental part of the data sources we use to do that.
David, I understand you're passionate about data linkage. Could you explain what that means and why it's important, and perhaps an example of how it's had a good benefit in shaping a health system?
Well, I think a data linkage is, as Karen said, is bringing data together from different databases. And there really are very strict principles that have to be followed so that there's privacy protection in the process. The purpose isn't to get a better look at an individual person's business, it's to look at the population. And by bringing data together from different databases, it's a case of one and one, not making two, but making five in terms of the value of those data. So where we have an issue, for example, at the moment is in the world of cervical screening, where much of the data that goes into a cervical screening registry comes from pathology or cytopathology laboratories. Now, pathologists don't collect data on people's ethnicity, whether they're Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders or their country of birth and language spoken at home, that sort of information. And yet it's some of those groups that are particularly high risk. So without those data, we're running blind very largely, except for occasional studies done around the place. So we're trying to rectify that through data linkage now, so we can import the data we need to better interpret our data in terms of priority groups, if that makes sense.
So it sounds to me we've got issues both about the nature of information that's being collected and improving that, and also effective sharing and data linkage.
Yes.
Could I go to the first bit first? What do we need to do to improve the collection of data? For example, I happen to have a Jewish friend, and my understanding is there are some health issues in relation to Jewish people, and quite sophisticated work has been done to ensure there's targeted screening among certain parts of the Jewish population. So presumably more of that could be done if we had the right data.
Well, I think we have much of the right data, and accessing it and using it is complicated. And one of the reasons it's complicated is a political reason, that the value of this data linkage is not understood at a population level as well as it might. And people are very concerned lest there be a breach. And the media is full of various breaches, high-profile breaches that occur around the world. So it's the fear of data not being secure and a lack of understanding of the value of the linked data. And also, for some people, they don't trust anyone else to have their data, even though it's publicly funded data, because they feel that it will be misused and they would prefer to hang on to it.
I'll ask this question, and whoever thinks they're best to answer it, would you please just go for it, grab a microphone. But right now we have a Royal Commission into the banking system, and I don't think it's built an enormous amount of trust within the community around the sharing of data. you know, I personally perceive the length of time we're spending in Australia trying to get a nationally accessible e-health record for the individual patient as an absolute tragedy for good patient care. Others will have other views. I'm just using that as my own view. So I'm just thinking this issue of trust, communication with the public, and the development of trust, so that when I was asked for my tumour, I automatically gave it to Karen's mob to fiddle with. Your thoughts, David, if I could come to you. Professor David Currow is a palliative care doctor, where I primarily think of him as, but also Chief Executive of Cancer Institute New South Wales and Chief Cancer Officer in New South Wales, and the Foundation CEO of Cancer Australia, and he's involved in basically everything to do with cancer. But is that issue of public communication, building of trust, is there relevance to that in terms of getting the right data sets?
Absolutely. We need to work with the community to understand the benefits that can be accrued through this, and that's a communication exercise, it's an education exercise, as you've already indicated, Julie. It's an opportunity for us to really work with a community to show the benefits that can be accrued through this. It is, and many of you will have been here, Amy Abernathy was our international keynote speaker a few years ago, and the year after she was here, she did a TED Talk. And in that TED Talk said the most important thing that any of us can do for the health of our community is to will our data to large data sets, to actually say we want it used because we know it will be used for good, we know it will build a better health system with better health outcomes. And that's the conversation that each of us need to take home tonight to our dinner table. We need to take it to a barbecue on Saturday night. We need to take it to the pub or to our sporting groups, that when we share data of this quality, we can really make a difference.
So what is data? I'm off from a barbecue and I want to say share data, and they say, what do you mean? So, yeah, I'm not being mean. I mean, what is the data?
Is this before or after the second beer? So, as Karen has said, every time we come in contact with the health system, with the government, we generate data. Every time we have a transaction with our credit card, we have data. At least with health, we're asked, are we allowed to use it largely? Not always, but largely. You think of your credit cards, and particularly your loyalty programs. Every time you swipe at Woolworths or Coles, it's not because they love you. It's because they actually want to know exactly what you've bought that day so that they can better target what happens in that particular store at that time of day in order to drive their interests.
Now, see, we swipe our Medicare card, but so you've got some data, haven't you? But I suppose my impression from what I've heard so far is that we need to improve the quality and the scope of data to better shape the systems. Is that right? Am I hearing you right?
Look, firstly, we need to improve access to the data we already have. We've got a plethora of data. We need to link it. We've got Australia's leading linkage group here in New South Wales. We need to actually say to them, get on with it. Then we need to increase the breadth. And at the same time, as Craig has said so eloquently, as we provide feedback, the quality of the data will improve, because those people who are generating it will make it their business to improve it as they see flaws and gaps.
Just before I come back, Karen, what are you thinking?
Oh, well, I'm agreeing.
Dangerous question.
Yeah, a dangerous question. But look, I'm agreeing. I think, again, from the researcher perspective, some of the gains that have been made, some of the achievements I talked about, they have been research-led, and they've been done on a project-by-project basis. And what researchers haven't yet got to, or what any of us haven't yet got to, is some kind of enduring, linked, dynamic resource that we can really build upon, and that would actually allow us to offer young researchers much lower barriers to access so they can get on with it, so they can make a career in this area, so we can build not only an infrastructure around the data, but around the people who are expert at using the data and improving our health services.
Speed matters, doesn't it? I mean, that came through in Dr Earle's presentation, that where we once would have waited for the randomised control trial, many patient groups are pushing like mad. Like if I get recurrence, I want to have a go at immunotherapy, and if I find out there's a great one in the US and it's not on the PBS here, I'll probably be knocking on a Polly's door. Inevitably when you're affected, and advocacy groups band us together in groups and we lobby. So speed matters, doesn't it, in this?
But inherently, what we're not saying this morning is the reason we need accelerated real-time data is that not every one of those new therapies is going to work. In fact, some of them will offer toxicities in excess of the benefits. And what we're not seeing before we're registering is the full picture. That's why we need accelerated data. And unfortunately, in the media at the moment, what we're getting is it's new, it's shiny, it has to be better. Let's face it, most drugs that are tested out there do not get to clinical practice because they fail. And so accelerated data is not about knocking on politicians' doors and saying, I want this. It's saying, let's evaluate it as quickly and as thoroughly as possible in order to give a balanced view of what the new and shiny will deliver.
Tell me about pancreatic cancer and using data to shape the system.
Pancreatic cancer is a deadly cancer in our community, and we all know the dreadful figures that we see. 20 years ago, almost to the week, there was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that said if you look at places across the United States that are doing surgery in that area, you will find that high-volume centres are delivering better outcomes. We do a tiny, tiny fraction of pancreatectomies compared to that study. And so we can't wait for statistical significance. We have to talk about the magnitude and direction of what we see. And when we looked at data in New South Wales using linked data sets, bringing together David Rota's cancer registry, bringing together the admitted patient data set that covers the public and the private hospital, and sadly bringing together the National Death Index, we saw exactly the same pattern. And we took that a step further. Having presented data to clinicians and had clinical advisory groups working with us, we then said, so if you're in an area where you've got a low volume centre, what are the chances you'll be offered a procedure in the first place? Yeah. And they were about half as great as those that lived in a high volume region. And if you went to a low volume centre, as we've discussed here on many occasions before, you were twice as likely to be dead at 30 days. You were 3 times as likely to be dead at 90 days. And your 5-year survival was going to be much less. What have we seen in the system? We've gone from about 70% of our pancreatectomies happening in high-volume centres to more than 90% of
that's
our
worth
pancreatectomies.
A clap. That's a terrible cancer.
But it's only through linked data because really, for the clinicians in the room, 10 years ago, who of you had any feedback on your performance at a systems level?
Oh, don't start me on that. I'll lose my objectivity.
There's not a hand going up because there was no feedback loop. Yeah. And so linked data can provide us with a powerful tool. It's not quite real time yet, but we're getting there. We will be reporting to the end of 2017 in a couple of weeks' time.
From a patient perspective, the amount of data that the system has on what is often called outliers, in other words, clinicians who do not achieve results consistent with the general results of most clinicians in that field, it's a real area of unmet attention, isn't it? And my impression is we can't work out whether it's the college responsibility, the hospital manager's responsibility, and of course, I am legally trained, doctors can afford lawyers.
Look, let's not pass the buck. We all have a responsibility here, and the Cancer Institute is taking leadership in that.
Okay, look, thank you. Look, just before I come to one other question, for David. Hand up, is anyone here from Newcastle? Look, welcome. The reason I mention it is a woman called I used to work at the ABC for many years as a radio broadcaster, and a woman called Jill Emberson, who was the morning presenter, you would know, on ABC for many years, is currently has pancreatic cancer and has been through the rigours of treatment and is talking openly about her approaching death. But in the process, she's got funding from the good old ABC to do a podcast on her treatment experience. So if you have an interest in pancreatic cancer, Jill Emberson, and Google it, and there's already a lot of media coverage. I've also done a series of podcasts for Cancer Council New South Wales, interviewing experts about a whole lot of issues to do with cancer, not cancer specific. For example, what is immunotherapy, with a leading clinician talking about it. So if you go to Cancer Council's New South Wales website, /podcasts, they're all there and it's all free to download, and they're excellent, I think I can say. My questions are okay, but it's the answers I want you to listen to. But David, breast cancer, an example of how data's been used to shape the system in relation to breast cancer.
In breast cancer, best evidence has been for some time that women with early stage disease, where there are no lymph nodes palpable under the arm, should have a sentinel node biopsy. That is, that they should have an injection that identifies where that part of the breast where the cancer is drains, because if that particular node is clear, then that woman doesn't have to have more extensive surgery and potentially more extensive therapy after surgery. When we started to look at that again across the system, no one had looked at it before. We had some high-volume centres where no one was getting a sentinel node biopsy, and those women were not being informed of the option of doing that. I'm really delighted to say that the laggard on that list has gone from 0 to 20 to 46% in 3 years, and importantly, the rate across the state is in its mid-60s, so we're getting there. But without being presented with those data, that person, that practice, and the people around them have no idea how the rest of the system is working. So again, cancer registry, admitted patient data set, link it, de-identify it as Karen has said, and provide timely, high-quality, analysed feedback to clinicians so that they can actually see where they sit compared to their peers and colleagues.
Because we're being filmed and this is being live streamed and will be edited, I think 2 lessons you've emphasised again is that whatever your cancer, go to a high volume treatment centre. And we haven't mentioned multidisciplinary teams, but that's also another critical patient perspective issue, isn't it?
Look, absolutely, and Can Refer on the Cancer Institute's website only promotes centres with adequate volume and access to a multidisciplinary team where people's care is overseen by that multidisciplinary team.
Can you just explain Can Refer again, just so in case people aren't aware of it?
Can Refer is a website which provides advice to patients, their families, general practitioners, 2 clicks of the button, diagnosis, postcode. Where is your nearest centre with a multidisciplinary team and an adequate volume to be hoping to get world's best outcomes?
As a head and neck person, I had no voice for 3 months, and I didn't get my normal voice back. It's not actually the normal voice, but this new voice back for, until 18 months after treatment, working with a speech pathologist. So while my radiation oncologist and medical oncologists were critical, there was months of work with non-medical staff that got me operational, just as an example. I want to come to my dear friend from the Western Division, but just before I do, any questions or comments, please don't sit on them. I know we've got... Thank you. I'll go to a couple of live humans and then I'll come to the app. Do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want to stand up so we can stare at you?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Taryn Metcalf and I'm working at the Cancer Institute. Both Karen, Craig in his presentation, and also David have touched on the importance of modelling, evaluation and economic evaluation. Is this really the way of the future, and how can we be using this data to be projecting and innovating?
Do you want to go, David?
What I take from Craig's talk this morning is that we have a tsunami of new therapies, and I want to come back to the concept of willingness to pay. You know, at the American Society of Clinical Oncology 3 years ago, there was a presidential plenary which indicated that the launch price across the world of the same drug had a tenfold difference. Now, whenever that's the case, we have to look at what are the real costs of drugs and how do we as a community actually interact with industry to get the best possible outcomes for the populations that we serve. And we can't do that in isolation of some really complex community discussions and some complex analyses. If it was simply a reimbursement for research and development, manufacture and distribution, and something for the shareholders, it would be easy. But it's not. That's not the world in which we live today. And so really looking at cost effectiveness is an integral part. And you know, if we're going to have accelerated registration programs, the next point, which you didn't quite get to, was that in a registration program that is provisional, my understanding, the US being the prime example, they haven't delisted a single drug after provisional registration, but I might be wrong there.
Bevacizumab and breast cancer is one.
One out of a plethora of drugs that simply haven't been delisted. Once there's a listing, it's there and it's going to stay. And so we've got to have those discussions at a community level.
And Dr. Earle, did you want to comment on that?
Well, going back to your question about modeling, I think it's very important, especially as we're looking at complex decisions, and what pops into my mind, a lot of the screening decisions, policy decisions, you know, how to set up lung cancer screening. We have a model called OncoSim that uses a combination of real-world data as well as data from other sources, literature, et cetera, but has been used extensively in setting up, for example, colorectal cancer screening programs and comparing the different ways of, you know, different types of stool tests, different brands, different cutoffs you can have, different frequencies, different ways of then following them up with colonoscopy, et cetera, that have allowed each jurisdiction to figure out what is the setup that would make their screening program the most effective and cost-effective for them.
Karen, they've mentioned poo. This is always thrilling. Can you close to your mouth?
Yeah, so I guess I want to support what Craig said when he talked about responsible management of a basket of goods. You know, I think that's a really useful concept because resources, of course, are never infinite. And I think we do have to think quite broadly about this. I think both data and modelling have a huge role here. And, you know, we've been lucky enough to have some great knowledge exchange with the OncoSim team in Canada. The work I referred to earlier on cervical cancer was based on modelling as well. And if we come back to it, you know, I think this speaks to how do we balance those scarce resources across the cancer control spectrum? How much do we invest in primary prevention, say tobacco control, screening, you know, early detection, treatment, palliative care and survivorship? And I think that's really an important thing that we have to wrestle with, and one of the only techniques that will be available to us to get some early insights will be modelling. If we look, for example, at bowel cancer, David Goldsberry and our team has used 45 and up data to estimate the costs of bowel cancer in Australia. He's conservatively put that at $1.1 billion. So that really speaks to the the cost effectiveness of screening and early detection for bowel cancer, and I think that's where modelling can play an important role.
Now look, we've got to give them the numbers. I'm just staying with Karen for a second. I've got people waiting. But hand up if you got the bag. When do we get does the Australian government send us the poo bag to put... When do they send it, the bowel? 50.
50.
I'm 63. When I got the bag, I did it. Hand up if you did it when you got the bag. Now, good on you. Everyone else give them a round of applause. It involves a slightly fiddly process of putting bits of your poo into little tubes inside, and then in your fridge. It takes a little bit psychologically. Tell them how many are doing it and how many lives would be saved if we lifted it a bit.
Well, again, this is based on modelling and based on the types of data sources that we've been talking about. You know, our team have estimated that, you know, not only, you know, if we could get bowel screening participation up from about 40%, which is unfortunately where it is, to about 60%, which is closer to where the cervical and breast programs are, we could save 84,000 lives in the next 25 years.
Did
and that's
you
just
hear
extraordinary.
that? I am the most repressed person in the world, but when I'm in these worlds now, I talk about poo. That's so many lives. It's, you know, it's shocking just because we're a bit embarrassed about, you know, using a little government stick to put poo in a bag. Listen, I just need
Julie,
this woman to...
Just a quick advertorial. If you haven't registered, Karen's talking about disease modelling at breakfast tomorrow morning, and there are a few spots still available.
Great. Would you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Simone Ray from the Northern Sydney Cancer Centre and Nursing Services. Thank you, panel, for a great discussion. Please forgive me, I want to pass comment on an earlier panel topic of optimising consumer engagement and permission to use their data. And Professor Currow touched on it briefly, but I really think that the information providing of de-identification when you give permission for your data to be used could be a great way of engaging consumers a little earlier and sooner for those very valuable data sets that you are all doing such great work with.
Thank you so much. I'll take that as a comment, a pertinent comment for time reasons. Could I just introduce Scott Mclaughlin, the Chief Executive of Western New South Wales Local Health District, 20 years in leadership in the public and private health sector, and facing huge challenges in closing the gap, not only for Indigenous people, but for rural and remote people generally, and building respectful partnerships with people. You know, as I talk about high volume and access to multidisciplinary teams, how challenging is even that for you in your huge area that you serve?
Oh, hugely. Julie, for us, you know, 280,000 people across a region that's got 280,000 square kilometres, so a good patch of land for every person in the region. Trying to get clinicians as close to home as possible for all of our region is a huge challenge in recruiting the right people, but supporting them with a multidisciplinary team. In the last 6 years, we've multiplied sixfold the number of treatments that are being delivered in the region through chemotherapy, and we've more than halved the number of patients that are needing to travel to Sydney for cancer care. And so that the investment in rural regions in the last 5-10 years, David, right across New South Wales has been stunning. So for us, that's meant a really rapid growth in new technology, new staff, and a whole range of services. For us, one of the biggest challenges is recruiting the right allied health staff. And I saw a lot of allied health staff in the region, in the room here this morning, which was really heartening to see. But getting allied health staff into rural regions, and just hearing your story, Julie, about, you know, the criticality of speech pathology is really important for us.
And that bringing services to you, there would be people who would just die rather than drive from, I don't know, I have a property at Wellington, which is 45 minutes before Dubbo, so I go out there at least 3 times a month, and it's a 5-hour drive. So I've got some sense of the distances involved. And some people either don't have cars, don't have relatives with cars, or just when they're ill couldn't handle the drive. So some services need to be in the region, don't they?
Oh, Julie, that's the thing that scares the hell out of us, is the number of patients that choose not to receive treatment because of the challenge of travelling, time away from home, and just the fear that comes with a cancer journey. But one of the things that we've done just recently is stood up our first, and I think New South Wales' first, telehealth supported chemotherapy service in Coonabarabran. And so taking a service to a small country town but supporting it with specialists in Dubbo, we've found amazing success. And so I actually think there's huge opportunities through the technology we've got at the moment to bring services that were previously really complex and needed a highly specialised area. Taking on board David's point about needing high volume, we can still do that with the right specialist support, and so I see huge opportunity with the technology.
Can you give us an example where you've used data in your service planning in your big region?
Yeah, sure. Very recently, we've just launched our cancer services plan. So that was a couple of years of pretty hard slog. I know for Ruth in the room and a lot of other clinicians, sitting down and poring over data, looking at population projections, that the incident rates, treatment needs, and trying to make some decisions about the right locations for services. One of the most complex decisions we've made recently is around a new cancer centre in Dubbo, which we're about to start construction on very soon. And trying to make a decision around radiation oncology service, whether we need 1 or 2 linear accelerators, taking into account all the changes in treatment types, that the use of the new technology, and some really challenging decisions about the resource model around that. And so data was just crucial for us.
I was about to say, to get the money for the investment you're talking about, did you need the data to convince the people with the bag of money that we have to share to give some?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. Nothing moves in financial terms without good data behind it. I know that a lot of clinicians will look at the screen and curse and swear having to punch in data, but seriously, it is one of the most important things we could be doing.
Is Verity Ahern here? Yeah, run towards me quickly. We're at morning tea and I don't want to frighten the organisers. I'll finish in 3 minutes. I have a passion for radiation oncology. I'm alive and I'm not scarred. Can you come, or as my doctor said to me, you're lucky, Jill, we didn't have to disfigure you. They're very frank in the cancer world. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Verity Ahern. I'm a radiation oncologist and the director of the Radiation Oncology Westmead, Blacktown and Nepean hospitals.
So again, we've spoken of the far west, but you have too an enormous community and a very multicultural community with very large numbers of new migrants and refugees. Could you give us an example of how you've used data to try and shape your service?
Good question. I think benchmarking ourselves in radiation oncology using the Cancer Institute data and finding where we're doing not so well compared to our peers and where we are doing well, and working with our medical team particularly to change what we're doing to improve our outcomes.
So give us a specific example.
Yeah, I think breast hypofractionation is our example. So for early breast cancer, Cancer Institute data from 2011 showed that we were not offering that treatment as often as we might compared to some of our peers. And we've embedded that in our quality assurance meetings that we have. We've set up some tumour stream groups. In our breast tumour stream groups, we've got radiation therapists as well as doctors, and we are comparing our 3 centres, Blacktown, Westmead, Nepean, almost in a competitive way to see who can improve, and that's worked really well. And I think being very multicultural also, we're not discriminating age-wise or any other way in which patients get what treatment. It's just using the Cancer Institute data to say that we could actually be doing a bit better.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Would you give her a round of applause? I wanted to dive for a second into the treatment room. Our time is up, ladies and gentlemen, but I ask you to give a warm round of applause to our panel.